Okay, we are recording.
Okay, at 6 o'clock, we'll go ahead and call to agenda the Pleasant View Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, December 1st, 2022. We welcome all of those in the audience that are joining us tonight, anybody on electronic devices. We'll first call to order and ask Commissioner Bolingbrook to lead us in a pledge of allegiance and offer opening prayer reading of expression of thought.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this opportunity that we have to meet together tonight as a planning commission for Pleasant View City. We're grateful for this great city we live in, and we're thankful for the residents and all the people here that make this a wonderful place to live. We ask the Father in heaven to be with us tonight as we discuss the matters before us and get trained in our responsibilities as commissioners, that we may be able to understand our roles and carry them out to the best we can to make this city as best we can to live and do business within our city boundary. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Okay, thank you. First of all, we need to item 1B, which is declaration of conflicts of interest. All of those have had a chance to review the agenda for tonight. Is there anyone that needs to declare? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 2, which is the administrative conditions. So proposed conditional use permit and site plan for expansion of Wildcat storage units located at approximately 600 West, 2550 North. We do not have a full staff packet on that to be presented, so
I'm happy to give a summation. That was noticed, but we're awaiting a boundary line adjustment. So the way the ordinance reads, it allows for expansion of existing facilities up to a 10-acre footprint. That is what is being proposed. However, the lots where the current facilities exist are broken into several different lots, including the new parcels that have been purchased to the rear. And so until there's a lot line adjustment and those parcels are combined into one lot, it would not be considered an expansion, but a new project, and would have to recommend denial. So this evening, we recommend tabling this item for the next planning commission meeting, where that will give them the time to complete the appropriate lot line adjustments and have this come before the planning commission for consideration.
okay. So we have a discussion for a tabling the item. Just a quick question for the audience. This is not a public hearing, but are you guys here to possibly comment on that item, or will it be for the next item? Or are we okay to go ahead and let them, do you understand what she's saying for us tonight?
Yeah, and I think just in light of the fact that they've come and it was noticed, I think taking the comments and keeping record of them is very fair.
So if we're not supposed to, we don't have to, but we have the opportunity to take comments from the community. And we're going to ask if you would like to, you can come and give us your comment now, or you'll show up next time. So
Is nobody here from Wildcat?
they are not this time. They'll be here for next time. So, all right, if you don't mind, we just want to make sure you understand what the procedure was and what just happened. So, okay, hearing that, go ahead.
Clarify for their benefit, that will come back on the 5th of January. So.
Okay, hearing that as a discussion, do we have a motion to table?
Go ahead.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we table the proposed conditional use permit and site plan expansion of Wildcat storage units.
We have a motion on the table. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. None opposed, unanimous. We'll go ahead and move on to the second item. Item number 4 is listed as public hearing, legislative conditions and recommendations to the city council. Zoning map amendments to consider adjusting the zoning district for property at approximately 1630 west between Pleasant View Drive and Highway 89. Parcel 19-0014-0078 from RE15 to RE20. We'll go ahead and turn the time over to staff to propose, and then we'll open it for a public hearing.
Thank you, Chair. So this is located at approximately 1573 West. It's a couple hundred feet, a few hundred feet south of Pleasant View Drive. The proposal is to go from the RE15 zone to RE20. So that would be considered a down zoning. Staff is of the opinion that this is a cleanup item of a small parcel. It's not what's the entire parcel is. Well, they will eventually combine the parcel that's being proposed to be rezoned, which is about 570 square feet, which should probably smaller than this room, maybe a little about the same size, somewhere around there. That to be rezoned to RE20, they will then at some point combine it with the existing parcel to the north, and as part of a proposed subdivision, and which that existing parcel already has the RE20 zoning designation. So this is considered by staff to be sort of a cleanup item in preparation for a subdivision. It'd be a slightly lower density zone. However, given the size of the parcel, it will have no significant effect on the ability to develop the property to the north that already has a potential subdivision that's being in the process of being proposed. So could you scroll down just a little bit to that subdivision map? So this is the draft of the subdivision map. I have received an updated version of this just in the last day or two that I haven't had a chance to review, but this is what I had on the books at the time of the writing of the staff report within the last couple of weeks. So that they're looking at a 4-lot subdivision, and then parcel, I forgot to grab my pointer, but you can see there's a little V-shaped.
We got
So you can see this sort of V-shaped portion of the property, and the parcel that's being proposed is just right in there. It's just in the crook of the V. So it's a really small piece of property. They're just trying to make that lot a little bit more desirable, and have a better front yard essentially for those that will eventually purchase that if it's approved. So I would say that the most substantial decision that was made regarding this project has already been made with regards to the zoning, because the majority of it is RE20, like overlay. It's RE20, so this is just an attempt to enhance one of the lots. The future land use map identifies the property in the as in the low density residential land use category, which is identified as being 2 to 3 units per acre. A request to rezone the Budge property from RE15 to RE20 is supported by the general plan and meets area compatibility. The application to adjust the zone that staff view as from the RE15 to RE20 zone is consistent with the future land use map, which is part of the general plan. And staff recommendation is that this is, again, an extremely simple cleanup item for a small piece of property that's anticipated to be combined with an adjacent property that's already RE20. And that it's consistent with the future land use map designation for this area, and for which there's a concept development plan that's been presented as well. Does the commission have any questions for me?
Questions?
No, this one will be pretty clean.
I actually do have some questions. First of all, will this road go all the way through and connect there, or is that a temporary deadhead?
I'm not aware of any plans for it to go through.
But they'd still have to have the turnaround. So is this lot, this is actually part of this other property. So, okay, come to the mic and state your name, please. You're the petitioner, right?
Yes, I am. So I'm Sean Brierly. My mother-in-law is Diane Birch that owns the property. So this is an older drawing. We are planning on putting a cul-de-sac that'll wrap around lot 4 and 3. We did purchase that little triangle piece from the neighbors because lot 4 wouldn't have had the frontage needed for a lot. And so, like you said, this is just cleaning up the zoning because we have already purchased that little piece from the neighbor.
So we're just actually, and that's why I'm asking the questions, because originally on the master plan was to have this as the road and not have another road, because then this would line up with the road above it on the master transportation plan. And it's slightly over, so I'll give you that. Now, the other part that I remembered when we reviewed this, I thought it was 5 lots that was originally brought before us.
It's always been 4.
So how, and this is for staff, I guess, how do we create something here? Because it's almost as if we're doing this, if this road isn't connecting.
But we're not here for something.
So, yeah, that's,
But I want to ask those questions before we rotate it, because I'm going to part 2 here.
well, and it's, yeah, I guess,
Why are we not connecting the road? Or how do you squeeze in a
that's rudimentary. I mean, the real decision and determination right now is at the appropriateness of the density.
Okay.
This will be forthcoming though, and please keep those questions in mind, and I think it's helpful to.
But will there be adequate? I mean, first of all, we probably should have had that go through, and I thought that was part of the discussion, since it wasn't coming here, that it would come here. And then will there be adequate turnaround for what we're looking for?
And that's absolutely something we can make sure to identify and look at our.
Where it comes.
So we have updated it with the cul-de-sac that does meet Pleasant View City standards
Okay.
on that. And like I said, this is an
I
older
just want
drawing
to
that
make
I
sure
thought we had.
it's talked about
more
beforehand,
one.
before you go down the
Yeah.
road and do all that. Okay, now here's my question that I want to bring up. When was this moved to RE20? Did this group do that when they did the original designation? Because if you look, and I don't know if you can pull up the future land use map, everything around this is all RE15, other than a couple of A2s that eventually will have the opportunity to go RE15 also. So is this considered spot zoning?
There's actually not a prohibition against spot zoning in state law. What really should be being addressed is whether it meets the general plan and the aspirations of the community expressed in the general plan. The application on the table addresses the 571 square feet portion, but the rest of it, regardless of how long the zoning's been in place on the rest of the property, it's in place, and so they're entitled to be considered under the zoning that's in place at the time that the application.
Unless we don't give this piece right there.
What's that?
Unless we don't give that piece, which we're talking about tonight.
That's
Not talking
that's
about
true.
this, we're
but-
just talking about this piece right here. So that's why I was just wondering is if everything else is around it's already 15, including all of these homes here. Are we sticking something in there that isn't necessarily, are we going to hear about it that,
I think the safest decision is to ask whether it meets the general plan, whether the RE20 zone meets the general plan.
when we pull
Because
the future land use map then?
there's a portion of it in the staff report that for this area,
I can scroll down. And I pulled it up on my computer, but they want to figure out.
yes, one of them is the zoning map and one of them is the future land use map. If it's above that, if it's,
The future line is above.
let me look at.
Say it's dangerous, so let me drive it down. Okay, there we go.
So this is the zoning map, and then the one below that's all dark green is the future land use map. And but in the description of that green color, so you can see it's described as low density residential. And both the RE15 and the RE20 zones are described as compatible or meeting the low density residential land use characterization or categorization.
Okay. Any other questions for the petitioner? I'd like to see it just out of
I'm
curiosity.
gonna grab a flashlight real quick, so it's not disruptive.
Any other questions for staff or the petitioner that's up at the time? Okay, thank you. We can open up to a public hearing this time while she's grabbing that. We have a motion to open a public hearing.
I'll motion to open public hearing.
Motion on the table. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we are now in a public hearing. Is there anybody from the vast audience that would like to address us on this topic? Following our regulations. Okay, anybody from, send in any comments? Okay, we'll take a motion to close the public hearing.
We've got to read the comments if there's any.
No, we haven't taken a, is it
Are there
nobody
any
sending comments?
comments?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Public comments.
Okay, motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close public hearing.
Motion, do we have a second?
No, she seconds it.
Seconds it. All in favor?
Aye.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're now closed from a public hearing. So just a quick. I just wanted to look at the zoning to make sure that we're compatible with our future land use map and that it matches. So I'll just take the extra 2-3 minutes if we can. Thank you for coming
Thank
tonight.
you for coming. Thank you.
There was no real.
Hey, come more often. We
Yeah.
usually like it when people come.
Enjoy your commute.
The real differences between our RE15 and RE20 is basically. So that's what we're looking is, are we compatible with what's in the area? And are we compatible with what our future land use map is? Because depending on what these people have,
That's what he's already.
well, he's saying that there isn't, if we don't adjust that one, then they're basically
With this
would lock it.
paragraph right here says that the future land use map identifies the property in a low density residential area category, which identified as being 2 and 3 units.
Land use map is different, then let's just take a look.
The section in the staff report was from the future land use map.
This one right here.
Yes.
So the entire thing is just low density, which would encompass both of them.
Yes.
Okay. Because we used to have it broke out into 15 and 20, so that's, I just wanted to see it.
Yeah.
So, great, okay. Thank you. No, I just wanted, that helped clarify it for me. I just wanted to see it because when we get a chance, can we follow up and see, was it always RE20 or did we actually change it here? That doesn't have to be done tonight. All right, do we have a motion or any other discussion items for tonight?
I'll motion to approve as presented by staff.
Recommend approval.
Motion to recommend approval by staff or recommend approval as staff is presented in their report.
We have a motion on the table. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion items? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimous. Thank you. And thank you for letting me ask questions because I keep asking questions. Jeff made a motion.
Dean Stokes made the motion.
Dean,
Jeff
Jeff
seconded.
second. I went backwards.
All right.
Dean made the motion to open the public hearing.
Yeah.
I seconded it. Then, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
Oh, she's trying to.
I got us moving. Let's go.
Okay, so that, you'll be able to work with them on that. That has passed. We'll recommend it to the city council, so it'll come up to their next item. Okay, we go ahead and we'll move to item number 5, land use training. We have a trainer now on board, so we're excited to have our new person to help us out here with all of this. We don't need to table this now, just so we have more people here. I was like, you got your,
We're gonna send it out.
okay,
So-
good, okay.
So while she's pulling that up, I'll kind of give you some background. I guess you could call it the land use arena in the state of Utah has been relatively intense in the last 5 to 7 years. There's been a lot of changes in state code. I don't anticipate that to necessarily slow down, at least in the next couple of years. So as a planning commission, there's a lot of responsibility that rests on you, and we need to make sure that we're staying up with those changes in state law and what the extent, but also the limits of your authority as planning commission is, and just the city in general. And so one of the changes that's occurred in as of 2021 is that there's supposed to be planning commission members are supposed to receive 4 hours of training every year. It's relatively broadly defined as land use training. And then one caveat is that new planning commission members who are appointed are supposed to receive 1 full hour of training prior to voting on any motion. And so one of the things that one of the reasons why that's important is we want to make sure that there's both legitimacy and the perception of legitimacy behind decisions that are made, that the planning commission is operating both according to state law and city ordinances, and that the public has confidence in the objectivity and fidelity of those decisions and considerations made by the planning commission. So just to, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of coming across a quote that, if you could go to the next slide. Okay. Of a quote that, I had a principle on your mind for a long time, and then you eventually find a quote that encapsulates it better than you could. So I came across this in the last few days regarding from one of the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson. He said, "I know of no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform them to inform their discretion by education. This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power." When I really love that quote, because even though it's more general to just like the Constitution and our rights generally, that's been very consistent with my experience in the land use arena, that when both rights and authority are exercised, when they're not done so in an educated manner, it puts things at a risk of losing those rights or authority or trampling on somebody else's rights. And so the more effort we can make to educate ourselves as public officials and employees, the better that we can do at making sure that we're consistent with law, but also maintaining the rights and privileges that we have and the authority that we have by respecting the rights of those that we are appointed to assist in respecting their rights and also making decisions regarding the law. So just to summarize, the education of the people has a protective influence in defending people's constitutionally enumerated rights. And another related point on this topic, one reason why I find land use very interesting is because it occurred to me a while ago that you can't exercise really any of your rights outside of physical space. And so when you're dealing with land use, you're dealing with the physical space in which people exercise in one way or another all of their rights. And so as a result of that, that's one reason why land use can be such an intense area, because people are negotiating about their ability to or advocating for their ability to exercise their basic constitutional rights in a lot of ways. And so, for instance, if just one example that occurred to me years ago, is that if it were possible to eliminate places of worship from a certain zone or something like that, you would be functionally imposing on or infringing on the First Amendment, right? So that's just give you an example of how we exercise our rights in space, in physical space. And so it's something to think about as we make decisions and deliberate the public business. So I like this idea of being a steward. So in this statement here, it says that in your official capacity, you act as a steward regarding people's rights. Now there's a little bit more to it than that, but I love the word steward. It helps communicate an idea of a trust or a trusteeship, that there's, a sort of a sacredness that goes along with that people have rights, and there's an authority to help navigate how to respect those rights while also respecting the public interest. that those rights of the people involve not only individuals, but also the general public interest that has been codified into city ordinances and also in the state law. And so for that reason, that's why I say that acting as a steward regarding people's rights is not quite as simple as that phrase sounds, just because there's more than one party that's almost always affected by any decision. And there's not only just individual parties, but there's also the broad public interest that's affected, where, maybe thousands of people are affected by a pothole or, the width of a road, and it may not affect their day very much, but it may then also affect the neighbor's property, their day quite a bit. So one decision may impact a lot of people a little, but one person a lot. But you have to be able to think about how to respect and maintain both parties' sets of rights at the same time. So again, these sorts of issues, they include the rights of individual property owners, but then they also include those of the public. However, on that topic, sometimes people can, one of the sort of intellectual traps that I've seen people fall into in decision making is assuming that there's only two parties in an interaction or a decision that a government authority is making, that there's the public and then there's the government authority. And in my experience, I think it's almost universally true that there's almost always three parties involved. The government is operating as a steward to mediate or respect two parties who have varied and sometimes competing interests. I think that the best decisions that are made typically are those that it seems where there's, like, particularly say in a legislative decision where a new law is being proposed or amended or something to that effect, where the legislative body can work to craft the law so that where it seems that there's a conflict, that conflict can actually be recognized, that there is a way to respect two property owners' rights in two different situations and help them get most or all of what they want just through a more careful crafting of the law. In other words, the ability to recognize that there may be something on the surface that seems like it conflicts, but if there's a little bit more thoughtfulness, then it can be found to not actually conflict, and you can take care of both parties and respect both of their rights. Just had my computer, locked myself out of my computer. So 1 second. So there's three sides to an issue. This is a simple way that I use in my brain to think about these sort of issues that I've just been discussing. A lot of times people say, oh, well, there's always two sides to an issue. And when you work in government, one of the things that I've learned is that there are two sides to the issue. A lot of times when you're doing a relatively simple business transaction, but in government, the way I like to look at it is there's at least three sides to an issue. And that reason why is because usually there's more than one public, there's publics, there's differing parties within society who have varied interests. And the role of the government is to find a way to be fair to both of those parties. And the three sides of the issue, the reason why the third side would be the person acting in the official capacity in a government role who is seeking to remind both parties of what the law is and how the government can work to respect their rights, but that when a government employee or a public official has to say, well, the boundaries of what you can do are this, but the reason why they're doing that is for the sake of respecting somebody else's rights. And it can be common for at times for people to forget that, what they want to do on their property may actually affect their neighbor, right? And so remembering that there's three sides to an issue is just shorthand for how to remember that sort of thinking for me. So we have, after kind of this introduction, I have three videos that I'd like to share with you. These were prepared by the former state property rights ombudsman, who's the lead attorney in that office. His name is Brent Bateman. I've met and talked to Brett a number of times. I had the opportunity earlier in the year to have him present another presentation that he does, and I have a lot of respect for Brent. These, just kind of a couple caveats on these videos. They're done in a, I don't know the right term, but they're slightly cartoonish sort of way. But I think they're a really great summary, and they help, land use is often very contentious. And so I think they're trying to help get with the issues, address the issues while keeping it a little bit lighthearted so that it doesn't, provoke some PTSD from some of the decisions that we all know that we have to make it in the public arena. So if you wouldn't mind hitting that, I guess we'll have to do a volume check to make sure we don't hurt our ears. But so we'll watch the first one, and then we can discuss questions. With that.
If you are a local government official and you're involved in making land use or zoning decisions, or if you work with those folks, what we're going to talk about today is the three most important things that you need to know. The decisions you make must be understood and handled correctly, or else you may violate someone's property rights or lose a lawsuit. Hello, everyone. I'm Brent Bateman. I'm lead attorney in the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman. And today we're going to be discussing what I think are the most important and fundamental aspects of land use decision making. The difference between a legislative decision, an administrative decision, and a quasi-judicial decision. If you are a city council person or a county commissioner, if you're a planning commissioner or staff, or if any of your duties in any way involve making land use or zoning decisions in your community, every decision you make is one of these three. But these decisions are all made differently. They have different rules, and most importantly, different effects. The vast majority of local government officials that I know, they want to do the right things. They want to follow the law. They want to protect people's property rights, and they want to make the best decisions for their community. Unless you're evil, we're talking about you. Understanding our discussion today is the key to doing that. In my opinion, knowing what type of decision you make is the first step in making the best decision. If you will remember your high school civics class, in America and in Utah, we have three branches of government: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. The legislative branch, which consists of our elected Congress. Their job is to take policy and make law. The executive branch, consisting of the president or governor, their job is to take the laws and enforce them. The judicial branch's job is to determine what the law is. Hopefully they're very smart, and their job is to interpret the law in case there's some kind of dispute. Locally, in your city or county, the same three roles exist, although they may be organized a little differently. There is a legislative branch of local government. Their job is to take policy, what the citizens in the community would like to see in their community, and to turn that into law. Those are local ordinances. The administrative role arises after the law is made, and it applies the law to different individuals or circumstances. For example, if a land use application is made, the administrative role is to apply the existing land use law to that application. And the quasi-judicial role is interpreting the local laws when there is a dispute. So let's talk for a second about each one individually and how it works locally. First, legislative. A legislative decision makes law. A legislative body does this by discussing widely applicable policy considerations and formulating laws to enforce those policies. What would we like to see in our community? Let's make a law to make that happen. Examples of legislative decisions include changing the general plan, adopting or amending ordinances, or annexation. Each local government has one body and only one body with authority to do this: the city council, town council, county council, or commission. No one else. And the standard of review is reasonably debatable that it advances the purposes of LUDMA. That's a low standard. A decision need only be reasonably debatable that it is good for the local community and it will be upheld. Next, an administrative decision. An administrative decision applies the law. There are no policy considerations in an administrative decision. There's no, is this a good idea? Or does this work here? Those decisions have already been made and placed in the local code. An administrative decision takes an application and applies the existing law to it. Examples include subdivision or a conditional use permit or a building permit. An administrative decision can be made by any party that the legislative body appoints. Many administrative decisions are made by staff. Sometimes they are made by a planning commission, but they do not have to be. They can be made by any party appointed to the task. And the standard of review is substantial evidence on the record. If an administrative decision is supported by substantial evidence, it will be upheld. And finally, the quasi-judicial decision. A quasi-judicial decision comes into play in the case of a dispute, and it interprets the law. Every local government must appoint a person or body to handle this role, called a local appeal authority. Many places use boards of adjustment for this role, but that is not required. That's a quick overview of the three types of decisions and the differences between them. There are a lot of nuances we haven't discussed, but that's okay. This is enough to get started. Every time you make a land use decision, you have to think about the type of decision it is. Every time. If you'll do that, you'll greatly increase your likelihood of making the best decision. And hey, if you're going to make the best decision, hats off to you.
All right, can you pull up slide number 5? While she's working on that, there was a term in there that wasn't exactly defined. But before I share like my thoughts on it with you, he used the term standard of review. What are your thoughts on what that might be referring to? Any guesses or questions, thoughts? Okay, so the standard of review is like a land use decision is appealable to like state or federal court, well, probably state actually. And so you can, like an applicant, if they feel that it's not in harmony with, like the decision isn't within the confines of state law, there's something that was violated in that process, or it even violated city ordinances somehow, then they can appeal that decision to court and have a review of that. So when it says standard of review, he didn't define that, and that was interesting, but to me that he didn't. But he's referring to if it goes to court and a judge has to make a ruling on it, what it's saying is essentially the criteria that a judge is going to have to follow as defined in the State Land Use Enabling Act, which is it's what gives cities their zoning authority and also the parameters and limits and conditions of that zoning authority. And so what it's saying when there's a standard of review, it's saying this is the principle or the maximum on which we will evaluate whether the decision was made correctly or not. And so this is separate, but it's a similar concept as what Councilmember Uri is referring to is that whenever someone applies for a variance, there's which is a quasi-judicial decision. There are 5 criteria, and it would be fair to say that those are the standard of review in that case for a land use decision that's been made. They're just a little more detailed than these standards of review. So, but those are for quasi-judicial decisions. The standards reviews that were mentioned in this video were for legislative and administrative. Who's able to remember what the standard of review for? I neglected to mention that there would be a quiz. So, but does anyone recall what the standard of review for? What's that? Oh. All right. So the standard of review for legislative decisions is that it's reasonably debatable, and that a decision or an ordinance advances the purposes of LUDMA, which is just the state. Essentially, it's the state standards for zoning and land use. And so, it's a pretty low bar. And what it's essentially saying is that there's, I think, a good faith effort being shown to enact the purposes of the city that they've declared that, you know, what they are trying to accomplish in their general plan, things like that. So, and then the standard of review for administrative decisions, does anyone remember what that statement was? Okay, it's substantial evidence on the record. And so what that's essentially saying is that when the court looks at a decision, what they're going to be looking at is, if it were, to come up for judicial review, they'd be looking at whether the decision was made by evidence that was shown in the meeting, and that's the on the record part, and that's why staff reports and other things or public comments even are made where that are made on the record that demonstrate that the application either does or does not meet the requirements of the ordinance. And so the evidence part is you just have to have information that has been recorded in the meeting in some way to, that you have essentially have made a case that the ordinance either does or does not, and that that's the basis of your decision.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah, sure.
So the planning commission makes, like tonight, a recommendation on a legislative decision like a rezone. So is their standard review the same, even though they're not making that final determination as a legislative?
My guess is that if the only, I don't know that would have a big effect if we pass the recommendation on to the city council and they somehow make a decision that is how do I say this, contrary or to the planning commission, then the only or actually to the ordinances or the general plan or something like that. I guess this would be administrative. So according to the ordinances, the only issue would be did the city council somehow make sure that their decision was substantial evidence on the record. If there was maybe substantial evidence from the planning commission that was included in their packet that didn't, that demonstrated something opposite to to the city council's decision, then that could potentially be a concern. But because the planning commission in Pleasant View is a recommending body on administrative decisions, I don't see it as a big issue but there is more weight with the city council when they're making a decision that they need to be held to the same standard. And so there's a term called the land use authority, and the land use authority it's intended to be a flexible term that it's different people depending on what is defined in the city code. It's anyone who has the authority to make a decision or probably entirely administrative decisions on a land use application. So a building permit, the land use authority would be the staff who's required to review it. For administrative decisions like subdivisions and site plans, that would be the city council. And then legislative decisions, that's also going to be the city council. And then the planning commission is going to be a recommending body that helps make sure that the quality of information given to the city council is, higher so that they can make a better decision.
Ultimately, I guess the way it was taught in a few other different ones, and I had the opportunity to see Brent do his series live, I should say. But if it was always on the book, this group now reviews what's on the books, and that's what we make our judgment on. It's like similar tonight. I was curious when we changed RE20, but I wanted to make sure that we were staying consistent. And I appreciate your comment saying, well, they're already there. They're already RE20. So the fact they've come in and put an application. So this group basically is, if it's on the books, we're interpreting what's on the books and pass that on as a recommendation. Or if it's a legislative item, then we can make a decision based on what's on the books. Now, if we don't like what's on the books, we can say, we should talk to city council and would they let us make a recommendation to change something for the future? But we don't, when we're interpreting, it has to be based on what's on the books at that time. Correct. What's there right now? My heart may not, sometimes may not necessarily agree with it, but we're interpreting what's on the land use at that time.
So this is really great conversation about it. I like when you say your heart may not always agree with it, but you're interpreting, you're evaluating whether it meets the criteria on the books, right? And that's why I use the term steward, right? Like there are plenty of land use ordinances that I've seen that I think, oh, that's missing this factor, that factor. But the job is to be a steward of the code or the ordinances and say, does this meet the code, right? And then if there's and that's how we protect parties who are applying for a land use decision to exercise their rights. That's how we protect their rights. One of the ways is if they meet the requirements to ensure that they get an approval when they're entitled to it based on the qualifications of their application according to the code. But we also protect the public by making sure that they're held to the correct standard, and if they don't meet it, that it's it's not approved, or that there are conditions imposed to bring it into approval. But then also to continually be re-evaluating the ordinances to make sure that they're in the public interest, so that we're not having ordinances that are outdated or outside of the public interest. And so that's kind of goes back to the triangle that I'm talking about, is that you have to be thinking about multiple pieces or moving pieces at the same time. And so it's really, it's very risky to be operating outside of what a reasonable interpretation of the ordinance, and an application on the table to be denying, if it meets the ordinance. That's probably the biggest risk, one of the biggest risks you can take on as a city. And one of the phrases that's used legally is decisions that are made arbitrary and capriciously. In other words, they don't relate. They're just the whim or of the planning commission or the city council. They don't relate to the actual ordinance. And so if an applicant submits an application and it's deemed to meet the ordinances as in place on the day that a complete application, and that's a key term there, complete application is filed, then it's deemed, then it needs to be approved in order to make sure that we're respecting that applicant's rights. One of the ways to keep this in mind, and I can't remember if he said it in this video or the last, but one of the ways to keep the proper frame of reference or frame of mind when you're making these sort of decisions, and I'd like to introduce this into staff reports, is developing something called a decision type statement. And it's just a brief statement at the beginning of each staff report that I'll start including that basically says this is an administrative decision and these are the parameters for making administrative decisions. And then this is a legislative decision and these are parameters for making a legislative decision. And we'll get a little bit more into that on a later slide, but let's see, can you pull up the next slide, slide 7? So we already covered the standard of review for just generally. And then, so again, it's reasonably debatable for legislative decisions. And then just a simple way of describing legislative items. On legislative items, the Planning Commission is assisting in making new plans or laws. Legislative actions, the way I put it is they always come first. And I'll give you a little more detail on that in a minute, but the legislative body has a wide, very extensive degree of discretion. That essentially means that they have very wide latitude to determine what's in the general interest of the public, and then to enact laws in order to accomplish or achieve that general interest. The reason why I say that they always come first is because you can't have an application apply and be evaluated without first having a law in place to see that to evaluate it against. And so that's one way you can just figure out, are we making a legislative decision or an administrative decision, is to ask yourself, are we writing a law or recommending a law be written or adjusted, or are we evaluating something against the existing law? And so the standard review for administrative decisions, again, is substantial evidence on the record. And the point being that the decision either is consistent, or the application is either consistent or not consistent with the requirements of city ordinances. And then on administrative items, the land use authority has a narrow, very limited degree of discretion. They are essentially, going through a checklist of the requirements of the ordinance and saying, does it meet this? Does it meet this? Or does it not meet this? There is on conditional use permits currently in the state, there is still a little bit of discretion. They've become a lot closer to permitted uses. You can impose if the city council feels, or the land use authority feels that they can impose, it doesn't meet the standards as proposed, but they can impose reasonable conditions to mitigate the negative impacts to neighboring properties, then they can impose those. And then if they come to the determination that they cannot meet those requirements through mitigating conditions, then they can deny it. So they cannot seek, though, however, to entirely eliminate any impacts. That's specifically spelled out in state code as well. And so it's like, you can't say, well, I just don't want to hear anything on my neighbor's property, so you can't build anything at all. And let's see. Yeah, I think that covers everything on that slide. And then so we can go ahead to the next video. This one's a little longer. Oh, let me give you one caveat. He expresses some relatively strong opinions about the role of the Planning Commission. I think that it's healthy as an ideal. It's harder to achieve in practice. He talks a lot about the legislative role of the Planning Commission, and I'm not saying that. He talks about it almost as the sole function of a Planning Commission according to state code. That is true. However, the majority of planning commissions, probably based on their city codes, spend a decent amount of time in administrative decision making, site plan and subdivision review. I think that there's actually one of the upsides to that, I think, is that it's good to have more than one set of eyes on administrative reviews. Number one. Number two, I think it's good when administrative review, as appropriate, is done in the public, on the public record and in the public, because it helps make sure that the quality of the decision is right, and the motivations behind the decision are right, that there's substantial evidence on the record. And so all of those factors, I think there's definitely a time and place for planning commissions to be doing administrative review. So we can go ahead and watch this. I just want to give you that caveat.
Making the best decision. And hey, if you're going to make the best decision, hats off to you.
Now, that was interesting. Yeah, informative.
So, what do we do now, Ombudsman?
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to What Hat Do You Wear Part 2. I'm Brent Bateman, your friendly neighborhood ombudsman. If you watched part 1 of this video, you remember that we talked about the 3 hats that local government officials wear. They have a legislative role, an administrative role, and a quasi-judicial role. The legislative role makes the law, an administrative role applies the law, and a quasi-judicial role interprets the law. Well, today in part 2, we want to explain how to apply these concepts to the real-life work of local government. So, we've come here to City Hall to talk about planning commissions. But wait, put away that remote control. Even if you are not a planning commissioner, this information is for you. It's meant for council persons and mayors and city staff and property owners and developers. Knowing the planning commission's role and how it relates to the 3 hats will help us clarify the whole land use process for everyone. Also, let's set our quasi-judicial hat aside for now. The local quasi-judicial role belongs to your local appeal authority. That's another subject entirely, and it will require a video of its own, coming soon. Quickly, let's review. A legislative decision makes law. An administrative decision applies the law. A legislative decision could be a zoning change, an ordinance amendment, or a general plan amendment. An administrative decision applies the zoning to an application, like an application for a conditional use permit, subdivision approval, or building permit. A legislative decision can only be made by the legislative body, the city council. An administrative decision is made by whomever the city council appoints. So, knowing this, what is the planning commission's role? Is it legislative? Is it administrative? What exactly is the planning commission supposed to do? The planning commission's first and most important job is revealed in the name. It's called the planning commission. Its job is to plan, to make a plan for land use in the community that reflects what the community wants to be. Welcome to Planning Commission meeting, folks. We're all very fortunate to serve our beautiful town of St. Bernal, Utah, and we're here to make a plan. So, what's our plan? What do we want our community to be?
I think we should have a mix of uses in town. So commercial is fine by the highway if we must, but I will only agree to farms and large lots over by Van Moose Creek.
We've got to keep the industrial areas over by Migraine Canyon.
And what should we do in Cramped Hollow? I think a golf course.
Can we zone for a KFC right next to my house? I'm hungry a lot.
Thank you. Great plan. You guys are all kooks. Utah law states that the planning commission's duty is to make a general plan or amendments to a general plan and recommend that plan or amendments to the city council. That plan is the commission's recommendation for what the community should be. That is an ongoing process, and it takes work, and it takes time, and it takes care. We have other videos that talk about the general plan and how to make a good one. For now, we need to know that this duty to plan represents one part of a planning commission's legislative role. The planning commission is helping to make the law. Now, the planning commission's next role after planning is to make recommendations to the city council regarding zoning and land use ordinance changes. This is also a legislative role. Zoning decisions and amending the code make the law. The planning commission's job is to discuss, consider, draft, and recommend to the council land use regulations and amendments. Okay, welcome to Planning Commission meeting. Today, folks, we have an application from a Mr. Howard Widowmaker, who would like to change the zoning on his property. He would like to change the use from an ice cream shop to an outdoor shooting range.
And that will require a zoning change from the CF Commercial Fund Zone to the CD Commercial Debt Zone.
Do we really want that outdoor shooting range there? That property's address is on Kids Play in the Road Avenue.
I knew we would regret naming it that. But let's hear what the public has to say. They always make sense.
Sound familiar? Well, that's the legislative process. Discussing, considering, and drafting land use regulations is, like planning, so important that the local legislative body, the city council or the county commission, cannot by law adopt or amend a land use regulation without first receiving a recommendation from the planning commission. And also, like planning, this is an ongoing process. It is a constant effort to refine a city code, to always make it better, clearer, easier, and compliant with the ever-changing state law. If this is done correctly, the Planning Commission should spend most of its time on these legislative roles. Refining and changing the plan and ordinances, even for the smallest towns, is a process that cannot be neglected. And finally, the Planning Commission's role may be to make administrative decisions. Administrative decisions do not change the law, but they apply it to individual land use applications, such as a conditional use application or a subdivision approval. The Planning Commission has this role only if the city council has appointed it to them. Staff can also fill this role. It is up to the legislative body to decide what works best in your own area. Okay, folks, our last item on the agenda today. We have an application from our old friend Cletus McPoodleface. who would like a conditional use permit to open a commercial dog kennel.
That's in the middle of the RO zone, the residential oversleeper zone. Dogs are noisy. I don't like dogs. I say we deny. What does the ordinance say?
It says commercial dog kennels are allowed in that zone.
Shall we hear from the public on this one?
No way, Jose.
Then I move we approve with conditions. Like measures to keep the noise down?
And the smell.
That's it?
Really?
Phew. Nice job, you guys. This administrative role is very important, but it is not a core role of the Planning Commission. Nothing in the state code gives the administrative role to the Planning Commission. However, if that role is given in the local code, it must be done promptly and diligently and in careful accordance with the law. So that's the Planning Commission. Their role is to, 1, create and recommend changes to the general plan. 2, create and recommend changes to ordinances. And 3, handle assigned administrative matters if delegated to do so by the local code. Well, I hope this clarifies what your Planning Commission should be doing, their intended role, and how they should spend their time. In my opinion, the best run cities focus on these roles, and they tie together. A good plan leads to good ordinances, and good ordinances lead to easy and correctly made administrative decisions. And as in all aspects of life, if we focus on what matters most, everything falls into place.
So there was a statement that he made. I think he just barely made it, but it might have been earlier in the video. He said, understanding what type of decision you are making is the first step to making the best decision. And I think that's really important because when you understand that what type of decision you're making, it informs you what your responsibilities are with regards to that decision. And so a lot of trouble comes when a land use authority gets confused about what type of decision they're making, and then they assume that they have powers that they don't, or don't recognize their responsibilities to uphold an ordinance, something like that. And so, that's one of the reasons why I think decision type statements are really important, but also it's just a good, quick gut check to ask yourself as you're making a decision and to get yourself into the right frame of mind. I do have some questions for you. And will you pull up slide 9?
Is this it?
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't.
No worries. I'm trying to follow what you're doing, but I don't know.
Yeah, you're doing great. Okay, so the first question is what type of, and I've got about 6 of these. So, and you don't have to worry about whether you're right or wrong. Just feel free to throw out whatever your thoughts are, your best guess is, and we can discuss it. What type of decision is a zoning map amendment and why? What's your opinion on that? Any guesses? Okay, well, was there someone else that was going to say something too?
Yeah, and then, but we're a recommendation to city council because they're the only ones that can make that.
Okay, so that's an excellent point that you're not the actual land use authority in the sense of on a legislative item. It is a legislative item, but you're the recommending body, and so you don't have actual legislative authority, but the nature of the item itself is actually legislative. Because and that's one of the reasons why I asked specifically about a zoning map amendment. It's a little bit tricky. I think, at least in my brain, when I think of legislative, I think of laws, and I think of laws as things that are written, as opposed to drawn like a map, right? And so in my brain, that's a little bit harder to remember for whatever reason, that a map can be a legal document. But zoning map amendments are legislative. And then the authority is vested in the city council for the actual approval of that. What type of decision would be made by a board of adjustment and why? What of the different categories of? Get other, okay, so.
Oh, yeah, they're under that quasi.
Yes.
It's one I've never heard of before.
Yeah, and so it's, and he doesn't mention this. I don't know if he uses the term executive, but they're comparable to the three branches of the federal government, just with slightly different names. One of the core features of the executive branch is administrative decisions. And so, yeah, the quasi judicial is the reason why it's just called quasi instead of judicial is because it's not done by an actual judge. It's done by a body who's reviewing, whether there's, some standards of why there should be an exception or whether, an exception should be granted. Okay.
Scope, a level of land, and what counts.
And that's why, so in the way that limited scope is achieved is through the 5 criteria for a variance that are spelled out in state law that were mentioned a few minutes ago. So I don't have them all memorized right now, but essentially the burden of proof is on the applicant that they've met these pretty stringent criteria and that there's a pre-existing hardship on the site that they didn't create or impose on themselves that prevent them from being able to exercise the fundamental property rights for of a zone that other people are entitled to use on their property.
And they do have 2 different roles. It's not just variances, but sometimes appealed as defined in the code as well.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. So what would be the standard? We talked about standard of review for a site plan that was denied and why. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of a hint on this one about how to answer it. It's a 2-step thought process to figure out how to answer it. You have to figure out one piece of information first before you can know the final answer.
It's administrative based on the administrative criteria.
Okay, so so a site plan is an administrative decision. So that's the first framework you need or question you need to answer. And then does anyone remember the standard of review for administrative decisions? Then what was that they could be evaluated against by, say, a judge? Remember what's that?
Yeah.
So substantial evidence is for, I think, for administrative decisions, substantial evidence on the record, and then reasonable, I can't remember the second phrase, but reasonably, that it reasonably advances the public good, reasonably debatable.
So question for
yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, you just
training.
You're
So
good.
substantial evidence on the record, could that be considered something included in your staff memo, or is that something that has to be formally stated with the determination and the motion?
I think if it's stated in the motion, it should be something to the effect of, that the Planning Commission has determined that the application meets the requirements of the ordinance, or meets all the requirements of the ordinance, or maybe, that if it was a conditional use permit, that it meets the requirements of ordinance with the conditions that have been specified, et cetera. And so you do have to be careful in motions to not give reasoning maybe outside of the ordinance, so that you're not pressuring other Planning Commission members to vote the same as you. You want, to preserve that independence of everyone having their vote count equally and be authentically theirs. And so you have to be really careful about certain things that you put in a motion, because you don't want to be, you can imply, like, if someone votes first, like, I'm voting for this because, this is a great site and this person's worked really hard to meet the ordinances and gosh, they're a longstanding member of the community. And then the next person, you're kind of painting this picture, like, I'm voting for this because I'm a good person. And then the next person is like, well, that sort of implies that maybe I'm not a good person if I vote differently, right? And so you have to be really careful about that to preserve, independence and respect for different points of view. So great work on that question. Like I said, it was a 2-step, so that was a really good thought process. Let's see, what type of decision is a subdivision review and why?
And on the size of it, it'll be legislated. So we could be recommended or actually.
Yeah. So sorry, you said depending on the size? Can you explain your?
So minor subdivisions in our city get approved by the planning commission. but
Okay. Okay.
Regular subdivision goes to the city council.
Okay. So, it's actually a subdivision. It's a administrative decision. And so,
Just making a judgment call.
yeah, judgment
I
call.
was thinking the recommendation, but
Usually because it goes to
goes to city council.
Yeah. So if you think about the subdivision, map that's submitted or plat that's submitted as the evidence that's being reviewed against the law, then that I think can be a good framework for it. And then what's the phrase? I think we'll get these one pretty good because we talked about them, but what is the standard of review for legislative decisions? And what's the standard of review for zoning text amendments?
The legislative was the reasonably debatable.
Yes, that they're reasonably debatable, that they meet the purposes in LUDMA and the city code. And then what was the standard for administrative again?
Substantial evidence.
Yeah. Okay, so we have one more video. That'll put us right around an hour and then a few minutes to discuss afterwards.
Tarnation! The public have come to planning commission meeting. Yes, and they want to speak. We must flee. Hello again. Welcome to What Hat Do You Wear? Part 3. I am Brent Bateman, the State Property Rights Ombudsman. If you're watching this video and you have not watched Part 1, the difference between legislative, administrative, and quasi-judicial decisions, and watched Part 2, the Planning Commission, then stop this video right now. Go back and watch those first. In Part 1, we talked about how local government officials make either legislative, administrative, or quasi-judicial decisions. A legislative decision makes law. An administrative decision applies the law, and a quasi-judicial decision interprets the law. In Part 2, we talked about the role of the Planning Commission and their important legislative role to study, draft, and recommend to the council a general plan and amendments to ordinances, as well as their occasional administrative role to hear and decide land use applications. Today, in Part 3, we will really bring these concepts home. What do they mean, and what role does the public play? How can the public contribute? And in an upcoming video that you can show to the public at the beginning of a public hearing, I will address the public directly. I want to let the public know how they can best contribute to the land use decision-making process. So watch out for that. And again, let's set our quasi-judicial hat aside. It deserves its own video. This discussion will focus primarily on the legislative and administrative decision-making processes. The power of local government to make and enforce land use laws is not inherent. It is specifically delegated to them by the state. Land use power is derived from the police power to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens. The local government has great discretion to decide what it wants its town or county to be, and accordingly what zoning and land use laws it will adopt. Basically, our system gives a local government some power to tell people what they can or cannot do on their land in the interest of the public good. But In order to do that, the council must formally pass ordinances. This process of passing ordinances is the legislative process. Now, the public's role in the legislative process is huge and absolutely critical. The local legislative body, the city council or county commission, are elected by the public to do its work. And they should listen to the public, tell them what they want their town or county to be. Yep, that means that when a legislative decision is being made, there comes a point where the public has a right to speak. All right, we as the Planning Commission of the beautiful town of Pleasant Vernal, Utah, will now consider whether we should amend our zoning ordinance to allow a pet crematorium in our very quietest and best smelling residential zone. We will now open the floor to public comment.
I am in favor. I am sick and tired of my neighbor throwing her dead pets into my yard.
I am opposed to this proposal. New pet crematoriums will unfairly compete with my old pet crematorium 2 blocks down the road.
If this wasn't something we all wanted, why did they name the road Roasted Cat Street? And for the record, it was just the one cat that one time. Thank you.
When are you yahoos gonna fix the potholes over on Wipeout Street?
If you approve this, children will die. Won't you please think of the children?
Thank you. This is all great input. Thank you to our wonderful and helpful public. As a planning commissioner or city council person, as long as you are wearing the legislative hat, you can and should consider all of this input when making the decision whether to amend the ordinance. The state law requires that the planning commission hold at least one public hearing where the public is allowed to speak when considering a legislative decision. Your local codes may require more public hearings than that, such as at city council meetings, and that's fine. The public must be allowed to speak at whatever meeting that you designate a public hearing. And if you are making a legislative decision, you must hold a public hearing at least once. Listen to them, consider what they have to say, and then make your zone change or other legislative decision. What about when we are making an administrative decision? What's the public's role then? All right, last week, we amended our zoning code to allow pet crematoriums in the SSH1 zone. This week, we have an application from a Mr. Howard Muttbuster who would like to open a pet crematorium in the zone. This is an administrative decision, people.
There's a lot of people here from the public, and I think they want to speak. I don't think they want pet crematoriums here.
State law does not require a public hearing for an administrative decision. Only a public meeting.
But does our local ordinance require a public hearing?
Yes, it does.
Okay, let's open it up to the public.
If you approve this, traffic will increase on that street. My kids play on that street. Children will die.
If you approve this, burnt pet hair will be released into the atmosphere. My children breathe that air. Children will die.
If you approve this, pets are going to start mysteriously disappearing. My children love those pets. Children will die.
When are you dingalings gonna fix the potholes?
I don't have evidence. I prefer public clamor. Please make your decision based on public clamor. Public clamor. Public
We can't. That's illegal. For this administrative decision, we need evidence, facts. relevant, probative, objective facts that prove or disprove whether or not this application complies with our ordinance. Clamor, meaning the opinions, fears, and unproven conclusions of the public. That was okay to consider when we were making a legislative decision. That was when we were deciding whether or not to allow pet crematoriums in the area. But we have already decided that now. Now someone has applied, and our job is to decide whether or not their application complies with our ordinance. Because if it does, our answer to them is yes. Administrative decisions must be based on substantial evidence. So, what do we do with all those folks that show up at planning commission meeting, pitchforks and torches in hand, clamoring about an administrative decision? Well, there are some options. Option one, we can decide not to hold public hearings for administrative actions, or at least not to hold public hearings on every administrative action. Option two, if we do hold public hearings on administrative actions, we can make sure we understand the difference between public clamor and evidence. And option three, we can try to educate the public regarding their role on how to best fulfill it. Let them know that clamor is unhelpful at the administrative stage. Let them know that during an administrative decision, evidence, not opinions, is what is needed. The public's role here is important. In fact, it's critical, but too often it's misdirected. As local officials, we want to know what the public thinks and what they want. Their opinions are useful when we are making a legislative decision, but during the administrative process, we are applying, not making the law. Although this seems most often when the public shows up and has the most to say, this is the time to distinguish between evidence and public clamor. Managing this process and avoiding making administrative decisions based on public clamor is one of the best ways to make the correct and legally supportable decision.
So you'll notice in the video at different points, he said things, use phrases like legally supportable and to be operating legally, et cetera. And so one of the intent in sharing these videos is just to share what those parameters are to help in the decisions that you make, so that the decisions can be both legal but also be perceived as legal and have public confidence behind them that you're operating in your correct capacity. There are a couple of things in the videos that I wanted to just share a couple of thoughts on about public clamor. It's essentially, so he did make his point a little bit that public clamor is kind of the opposite framework or idea that a planning commission or city council could be making a decision on an administrative item. So if that's how you know when you're out of bounds, right? Like when someone's just saying something to the effect of, well, I don't like this, or it's gonna make this road busier, but you know that it meets all the requirements. At that point, you have to go by the book, right? And there's a process for educating the public to help them understand what your responsibilities are, where like we can work on developing an opening meeting statement for the meeting in general that sort of describe those rules when there's, say there's an unpopular subdivision or something that's being considered. One of the challenges is that and I wish it weren't this way, is that the public often gets involved at the administrative step when they see a practical decision on the ground coming in. And in order to influence something, they need to be involved at the legislative step, which, as I stated, essentially always comes first. And so the more that we can do to help the public understand that their rights can be exercised at the legislative step, which includes the zoning map, the general plan, and zoning text amendments, that they can have the broadest influence there. So, for instance, when the rezone that was recently considered a couple weeks ago was on the being considered by the city council, one of the very positive aspects of that is that the public was speaking at the legislative stage of the process, which isn't very common, to be honest. And so even though there was a lot of concern with the proposed rezoning, they were getting involved at the right stage of the process to share their opinion at that point. So that was a very good example a good public process on that aspect. And then he also made the point that the power of cities is derived from the state. They're in our state constitution, they are political subdivisions of the state, and so their authority has been derived from that. That's the state has given that in regards to land use decisions. They've given that authority without the they've given it through LUDMA, and then but they also can retract that authority to at least to some degree. There was a court case within the last couple of years that was regarding the inland port down in Salt Lake, and that was the court question, and the decision was the state disagreed with the point of view that Salt Lake City was taking on the inland port and what regulations should apply to it. And so the state said, we feel that this is a project of such regional and statewide significance that we feel that we should actually be the people who are able to regulate this. And so they came in and became the land use authority essentially on that. And my understanding is that it went to court, and that the court upheld the state's actions in becoming the land use authority instead of Salt Lake City, even though it was within Salt Lake City property. That was essentially adjusted. So are there any questions about that third video that I shared with you? Okay, if there's anything that's unclear, or there are questions that are rolling around in your mind, I'm hoping that the concepts sort of bounce around a little bit and questions come up. Feel free to call me or email me at my work number here, so that we can talk about those, because it's in the best interests of the city as an organization, the city as a steward of the public interest, and also of individual property owners, that these core concepts are well understood in your mind and fleshed out, so that we can make sure that we're protecting both the broad general public interest as well as individual property interests. So any other final comments or thoughts? Okay. Hopefully I didn't overwhelm you.
It's a great review. It's always.
I did have a suggestion, or wondered if before that is maybe to have a checklist when commission members are coming on. I think it should be like mandatory that the general plan be read with an understanding of what the citizens of Pleasant View have chosen we're working towards, and looking at the future land use map and these things, because otherwise we come on new from the planning commission and it's like they show up and it's like, you're on, you were the alternate, but tonight you're on. And there really isn't that understanding of even what the general plan is or what's legislative. And so I think a checklist as a planning commission member is something you should be familiar with.
I think that'd be great. Like an orientation even.
Well, and what he's saying is it's by law now they have to have an hour before they can sit up.
30 minutes of this is what you do.
I like that.
I really like the idea of the open statement that says what items are going to be, what it means to be legislative and administrative, and what items are going to be open to public hearing before the meeting even starts.
Is so important, because then it's like this is administrative.
And what I think was tells us it's a position, people this way, I actually did a job of 3 years, make a recommendation, says it's council, or this is administrative, and this is what it's here. And I like that.
Can you pull up the first slide with that quote on it again?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's why I love this quote so much, comment about the meeting statement. And the meeting statement is one education tool, both to the public who's present in the meeting to help them be educated about the role of the Planning Commission. But also as a reminder to the Planning Commission, as they review each item, they have that fresh in their mind and know what sort of framework they should be applying to that decision. I think that a lot of one big aspect of planning is the concept of managing expectations. And by managing expectations, I think there's an overlap with just the idea of education here. Like when the public walks into the room, in order to help make sure that they don't feel disenfranchised or frustrated in the process, if we share those opening meeting statement and decision type statements prior to the beginning of the meeting and prior to each decision or each type of decision, it helps set their expectations so that they don't have unrealistic expectations about what can or can't be done. And that again shows respect for both the public and their interests, but also for the applicants are on the table. I mean, let's see. One of the hardest things to do in life is to stand up for someone who is in an unpopular situation, but may be on the right side of the law, if that makes sense. And so giving a decision statement at the very beginning of the meeting or an open meeting statement helps tamp down the expectations to the right realm of where they should be for the public. So anyway. Okay, so there it is. And
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate that. That's a great reminder. I like the comment that he said was evidence versus clamor. Make sure that people know that up front. So it's like, because I think that would help tamper some of the people rushing to the mic. Even though, for the record, as soon as I retire from this, I'm going to come to every city council and ask for potholes to be replaced. So just to be that person. I mean, I want to be that person. All right, let's go ahead and move to item number 6, remarks from commission. I'd like to make a remark first to thank our staff for a great meeting that we had. I should say a gathering that we were able to to participate in that. I think that was a lot of fun for everybody involved, and it allowed us to get to meet each other a little bit outside of up here on there. So thank you for taking that effort.
Great turnout, and really appreciate your service. I think that's.
And we were looking for you. No, if you're sick, we're glad you didn't come.
Everybody has been sick. Like, where's the communication? Where's the public? Where's the punishment? Where's God? Just stay.
Just as a quick reminder that we will not be meeting again this month. The plan is not, unless there's an emergency or something. We will be January 5th will be our next meeting.
I will not be here.
Oh, come on.
And I think we already said
Got the memo.
I didn't read the memo, but they're going to be in Texas or Indianapolis.
Ooh, there you go. Should be at least warmer than it is here. All right, any other items from the commission? Anything from the staff?
Sir,
There are some things, I use city council about because when usually, we haven't, going upstairs, but we're finding out we were gonna have a Christmas market. Around no picture, some crafts.
Just one note, just as a follow-up, sorry. I'm sorry, Brandon, there's only one microphone, and I think one of the things we've committed to do to the planning commission is when you've made a recommendation to the council to let you know the result, and I'm sure you probably have all heard, but with the proposed rezone for the Christopherson property, that was denied by the council, so just as a heads up for you.
There is some exciting news though, with this one way up.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And I don't remember how much I discussed this with you all, but we had a joint application in with Far West City, two-way COG for a roadway project. This will extend over by the Jimmy John's where there's that signalized intersection back behind those fast food restaurants. Then there will be a frontage roadway that goes up and around and over, across behind the horseshoe pond, north of the horseshoe pond, connecting over into Parkland. And we're really excited about this project. We got full funding, and it's going to be phenomenal. And it's going to be a huge, huge safety mechanism, frankly. So we're very excited that we got that funding. So the funding will arrive in 2025. However, there are pending developments right now. And so getting the roadway project in place will start serving as a catalyst to get that moving forward with some of the developers funds. So it's great.
Anything else? If not, make a motion to adjourn for the night. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Brandon, thank you.
Sure, Phil, that's there.
You can sign when you need to get it signed.